Okay, we're on the air here. Okay. Someone was asking me if we were going to play with building blocks again, and yeah, we are, but not today. You'll recall that we very briefly one day went over the fact that the governing rules of an organization are the bylaws, and we talked about how those are subordinate to the Articles of Incorporation but superior to standing rules. We're going to go back and go over that once more because all of you have a set of bylaws to put together. They don't have to be real long, but as part of your final exam, you have that responsibility. So we're going to go back, talk about some options there. More importantly, we're going over these so you'll understand and hopefully understand, be aware of the bylaws that you may be living under and don't even realize it. If you're a member of any organization, the odds are that organization has a set of bylaws. If they don't, they should. And those bylaws are a contractual agreement between you and the organization that defines what your relationship to the total organization is. You know, as a member, what is your relationship to the parent organization? But just kind of as a reminder, the highest document, the most serious governing document is Articles of Incorporation. Some groups are incorporated, others are not. There are good reasons to be, but we won't get into all of that. It has to do with liability of officers and responsibilities if your organization should get sued. It makes a difference in terms of how you're classified with the Internal Revenue Service. Every organization that takes in money is obliged to report that money if it's over, I think it's a $35,000, it might have been raised to $50,000, but somewhere in that ballpark. If you're bringing in that much money or more, at least that much money per year, you're obliged to report that to the IRS. So it makes a difference how you're classified with the IRS, and based on your Articles of Incorporation, which are filed with the state that you're registered in. It can be Texas. You could have your headquarters in Texas but be incorporated in the state of Illinois or New York or Florida or something, if perhaps that's where the organization was founded. There are different reasons for incorporating different places. I've been in contact with several groups that are either incorporated here in Texas or in Illinois or Indiana. So as I make generalizations, those are the three states that I'm kind of have in the back of my mind. So you might find an exception somewhere else. I don't think I've worked with any California-based groups, even though there are plenty of organizations out there in New York and so on. But the Articles of Incorporation have those basic parts that we've identified before: the name, object, membership, officers, meetings, and so forth, executive committees, parliamentary authority, method of amendment, all of those things that are in the basic component of bylaws. How your purposes are set forth determines what your classification will be. If you are organized only for charitable purposes, only for educational purposes, then you stand a fairly good chance of being classified as a 501c3. And that's the ideal. That's what churches are, 501c3s. They're tax exempt. And that's a nice place to be. Many educational groups are in that category. A 501c3 or 501c is a not-for-profit organization. There are C6s and C7, you know, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's several different classifications in there, professional groups being one of them. And all of this affects the amount of how you report the revenue that comes in and how much of your revenue is taxable. Your 501c3 status does not exempt you from city taxes generally. Now if you go someplace like Sam's Warehouse, you'll be exempt from sales tax there. There's some things that a C3 is exempt from, but especially you're exempt from paying any federal taxes, any federal income taxes. So anyway, that's if you think that you have an organization with enough money that's important, that's the kind of thing you should check into with a lawyer or a CPA. You can get some parliamentary advice on that, but that may be some, if you have lots of money, that's something to be concerned about. A group that I worked with recently that was in the formulation stages was particularly interested and did obtain a 501c3 because they're interested in applying for grants through the Department of Education. And you need to be a not-for-profit organization in order to apply, usually, for government grants. But again, it depends on the grants and what those are set up for and so forth. Okay, let's go back and kind of work our way through the parts of the bylaws. And I brought, I don't know, I've got at least 4 sets of bylaws, maybe 5 up here with me, and see how different groups word and identify who they are, how they identify their purposes, and so forth. We know from our previous review that Article 1 states the name. So, and sometimes that's very short and simple. Other times it's a little more lengthy. Texas Speech Association says the name of the organization shall be the Texas Speech Communication Association. That's simple enough. This one I'm holding says the name of the corporation is Southwest Central Church of Christ. The American Institute of Parliamentarians have a slightly longer name. The name of this organization shall be the American Institute of Parliamentarians, parentheses, hereinafter referred to as AIP. That gives them the ability to use that little acronym all the way through and not have to write all of that out. So the name is AIP, comma, an Illinois not-for-profit educational corporation with its registered office maintained at 105 Madison Street, Chicago, Illinois, 60602. Some people put their registered agent or their headquarters address at the very end. That's where my natural instinct is to do that. Nevertheless, I'm an active member of AIP, and they are parliamentarians, and if they want to put it up there in the name, you know, that's certainly okay to do it there. This group doesn't call Article 1 name. Instead, Article 1 is membership, and we'll look at that in a minute, but they just labeled it Introduction, and it says Congregation Beth Israel is an American Reformed Jewish congregation dedicated to the glory and the perpetuation of our Jewish heritage. Article 1, membership. So see, there are a variety of different ways that this can be done. The group I was working with this weekend, and it's the last one we'll look at on name, says the name of the corporation is International Multisensory Structured Language Education Council, and the corporation is hereinafter referred to in these bylaws as IMSLEC. So again, they can use an acronym. So there's different wording. This is the simplest section to put together. Usually, once in a while, a group can't agree on what they want to call themselves, but that's the simplest part. Okay, Article 2 is either called purpose or object. I think Robert calls it object, but most groups identify it as purpose. Congregation Beth Israel skipped purpose. They didn't bother to write it down. I think they probably thought anybody who's a member here is going to understand what our purpose is, and for whatever, these bylaws have been around a long time, they did not identify a purpose. The Church of Christ didn't identify a purpose either. Under name and location, they've got the name, they list the principal office, they list their registered agent, and they move to Article 2, members. So while we as parliamentarians tell you there's an ideal way to do it, not everybody does it that way. And they're your bylaws, you know, and if you're happy with them, that's the main thing. And some groups have been around so long, you know, especially churches and different ones, that it's probably just assumed by the name and through the voice communication with the membership and so forth that they know what those purposes are. For whatever reason, they don't state them. Texas Speech Association put name and purpose in Article 1. So it's Article 1, Section 1 is the name, Article 1, Section 2. The object of the association is to promote better speech communication in the state and to foster appreciation and understanding of the profession in Texas. The term speech communication is used to include all areas as represented by the interest groups. Now, we're not going to see interest groups in anybody else's bylaws, but when we get over under kind of what's the equivalent of committee structure, we're going to see that there's a very elaborate interest group structure set up, and so the reference here kind of cross-references over to those interest groups. Okay, American Institute of Parliamentarians says under purpose, and they just have one section, Article 2, Purpose, Section 1, Purpose, the general purpose of AIP shall be the improvement of parliamentary procedure. Specific objectives are codified in the AIP action program. So later on, and we probably won't get through all of this, but they have an action program that's a very detailed education program, and that's where all those specific objectives are spelled out with all the ramifications and implications for committees and so forth. Okay, I won't read them all, but IMSLEC, the Language Education Council, to shorten it for you, has 3, 6, 9, 10 purposes. There's a half a page here identifying who they are and what they do, including high professional standards in the field, an evaluation and accrediting purpose, and they list all the areas that they're interested in, promoting cooperation among diverse entities that are related to what they do, engaging in fundraising programs, and especially accrediting organizations that will in turn certify teachers who use certain approaches they work primarily in dyslexia, and so they have an elaborate program for certifying that. But because, one, it's a new organization, and because they are interested in obtaining government funding, these purposes are spelled out very carefully and very specifically. Now, after they've been around for 10 years or maybe 30 or 40 years, chances are they'll come back through and say, well, you know, we really could put some of those purposes together and just kind of make a broader statement that will cover several of these things. But right now, because they're new, it's important to spell it out exactly so that people know whether they want membership in the organization, so forth. Any question about purpose? Purpose may be one sentence, it may be half a page. You know, it depends on what the group is doing and how many words it takes to explain what it is that you're about. Okay, the third article is membership. And sometimes this is a real tricky deal. Other times not. Now, sometimes it's anybody who's interested and pays dues of $30 a year. Other times, as we're going to see shortly, it's more sophisticated. Can you think of names of membership categories that you've either seen on people trying to get you to join something, or if you've paid dues to an organization, what did they call you? I mean, some groups just have one category, they're all kind of regular members. Michael?
Members, associate members, honorary members, ex officio members, you name them, they got them depending on the dollar amount of your quote dues.
All of them could belong in this category. Ex officio is something else. Is not, excuse me. Gracious. Ex officio is being a member of something by virtue of the office that you hold. So sometimes in the bylaws you'll see a line, the president is a member, ex officio member of all standing committees, and it should say except the nominating committee. you normally don't want the president meddling in the nominating of new officers. And we'll come back to nominating committee too. You don't want the president appointing the nominating committee. There's one group I'm aware of that's had the same president for years now, because he or she appoints the nominating committee and handpicks friends, and those friends renominate this person, and so it's a shoo-in each time. But that's what the bylaws say, and the members haven't been brave enough to amend the bylaws to take care of that. All you have to do is amend the bylaws and say the committee shall be elected instead of appointed, and you could fix that in a heartbeat. But they've chosen not to do that, and that's okay. It's their organization, and if they're happy, that's it. Except they're not happy, or at least some of them aren't happy. Okay, so you may have, under membership, the first thing you want to do in section 1 is spell out the categories of membership or identify who is eligible for membership. Sometimes there's a ceiling on the number of people. The example of sample bylaws that you have in Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, that for whatever reason that little sample just says membership shall be limited to 200 people. Now maybe somewhere along the line you've determined that's all your clubhouse can handle. If you had 500 people, you'd have to meet somewhere else. And if this is a social organization, a dance club or something, I don't know. Anyway, for whatever reason, you may just decide that you'll take no more than 100, 200, 300 people at a time because that's where your clubhouse is, and that's all the people that you can manage. Now, it depends on what kind of group it is. If it's something like a civic association, you couldn't say, well, we're just going to limit this to the 50 people on these 3 streets and the rest of you can't join. That's not appropriate. But sometimes there's a reason to limit the membership size. But who is eligible to become a member? Do you have to be a high school graduate? Is your hand up, Michael, or are you stretching? Okay.
They set the criteria. In certain associations, you have to live in that parameter. If it's a homeowner association, you got to live on that subdivision.
You have to have a home in the right section.
Right. In other words, how are you going to be making decisions for a subdivision or a group of people, and you don't have the slightest clue what's going on? Like when the mayor of Houston runs today, he has to live within the city limits of Houston. That's
the President of the United States is supposed to live in the state
in the United
that
States.
He files in.
Right, and and he has, there's certain things like being an American citizen. They may have their own rules, which may not be too tasteful sometimes, but they are certainly acceptable. I mean, there's some quality.
It's their rules.
Right. There's some people that can serve in certain areas, but will be disqualified automatically, say by residency, lack of time in a position that they may be interested in serving in. Some organizations won't allow you to up the ladder until you've been with them in a lower position for 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, hold on to that thought, and we'll come to that one, particularly when we get over to officers and board of directors. That's a good place for that kind of information to go in. So you may find that there's a geographical stipulation. Where you live makes a difference. And with my civic club, for example, the bylaws, I'm over here in University Oaks near campus, and the bylaws list the parameters of the neighborhood. The University Oaks is bounded by these streets. So anybody who lives in that addition, as set forth in the document then, is eligible for membership. But that just says you're eligible for membership. It doesn't say you're automatically a member, okay? Because Section 2, usually it's Section 2, is going to identify the dues. Living there is not enough. You have to pay dues if you want to vote. Other times, if you're enrolled as a student at the University of Houston, then you're eligible to vote in student elections. You've already paid your dues by registering with the university. Okay, but let's go back to Section 1 for a minute though. If you have different categories of membership, this is where that's specified. So you may have regular members, and unless you specify otherwise, the implication is These are the regular members or the core group. But you may have associate members. Professional Fraternity Association has the member fraternities, but then in order to raise money and to give status to the vendors, and we've talked about vendors and exhibitors with our large meeting planning, those people are classified as associate members, and they actually pay more dues than the regular members. Somebody got wise back there in the formulation of these bylaws, okay? There are about, it varies a little from year to year depending on which member fraternities pay their dues, but they have about 30 to 35 regular members, the member fraternities, and these are fraternities in music, law, chemistry, nursing, agriculture, medicine, creative performing arts. There are several, and there are about 3 in law and 2 or 3 in medicine, about 4 different music fraternities, and so forth. And the fraternities all pay, the last time I looked, about $150 to $200 a year, maybe let's just say $200 a year in dues. The associate members, one, because they don't want very many associate members, they only want as associate members people who are serious about contributing to the welfare of the organization. And the associate members could include several major hotel chains like Sheraton, Hyatt, Hilton, Weston, anyway, major chains. Adams Mark kind of comes in and out. And it may involve independent, not necessarily a chain, something like the Doral Country Club or those kinds of groups. But those, and it may include airlines, it may include vendors who sell fraternity-related products, and so on. Travel agencies. Those people pay about $500 a year in dues, and then they have some other set out in those subcategories. They have some specific responsibilities, like throwing a really big party and reception, and doing some, and then those associate members get together in a separate meeting and elect one representative to the board of directors of the fraternity association. So here each fraternity has, and we'll look at board of directors more specifically in a few minutes, but here is a board of directors with all the regular members, with one member elected over here who has voting rights, who can speak, make motions and things. And so these are the, there's a cost reward in all of this. They keep the number of associate members down by making the dues high. They keep the voting power of that group down by only letting them have one representative, but that's enough that those who choose to join do because of the contact they have. Professional Fraternity Association represents close to 2 million customers per year. When you look at all of those executive officers and national presidents who come together and represent constituent fraternities, some have only 10 or 15 chapters, but some have 40 or 50 chapters nationwide. Some have annual meetings of 150 people. Some have annual conventions of 2,000 or 3,000 people. So there's a massive convention business that's represented, and for groups that can afford it, then associate membership is a desirable thing. But you have to know, and because you have specified in the bylaws what the rights and powers of those people are. And so in that case, you've got regular members and you have associate members. Okay, Michael mentioned honorary members a minute ago. Most of the fraternities have several categories of membership. They'll probably have, under their regular members, they'll have collegiate and alumni. A few only have collegiate members, but a number of them have elected alumni. Can you only come into the group through the college experience? Once you've graduated, is it too late you know? Or are there elected alumni members, and if so, what are the qualifications for them? And those are going to be different from an undergraduate or collegiate member. You know, a collegiate, the qualification for membership there may simply, and if you've got all these categories, then you may find that you're breaking out with a number of sections. You know, collegiate membership, those people majoring in such and such with a minimum GPA of thus and so, who are enrolled in at least X number of hours and who are at least sophomores in classification, or, you know, it'll be spelled out like that. And then you might have a completely different section that says elected alumni members, those people who have graduated from an accredited college or who have demonstrated professional excellence in chemistry, dance, whatever. I don't know if you could demonstrate excellence in chemistry if you hadn't been to college, but anyway, you know, the qualifications then for alumni membership would be different. They may also have up here honorary membership. What do you have to do to be an honorary member? Phi Beta, which is a creative performing arts professional fraternity, has honorary members, and those people, it's been a while since I read it, but it says something to the effect that they have to have national or international acclaim. They have to be nominated by the Director of Honors and presented, resumes, etc., presented to the Executive Council. It takes the approval of the Council to, you know, elect someone to honorary membership. And the hurdle, and then the in-house hurdles are very high. So that here you have movie stars, musicians of the caliber of Van Cliburn, performers like Bob Hope, you know, names generally that are household, easily recognized names, that they're of that level of acclaim before they are voted into honorary membership. Well, what do honorary members get to do? Do you just get a certificate and, yep, you're an honorary member? Or, you know, do they have the right, not that the people I've just named would ever come to a convention. Elizabeth Taylor has yet to show up, and that's someone that they inducted years ago. But, you know, what rights do these people have? Can they vote? And normally, honorary members have the rights of the regular members, but not the obligations. You know, they don't have to stand on committees, they don't have to pay dues, but if they ever were to honor you with their presence at an annual meeting, then certainly you would let them speak and have a voice. But maybe not. You know, if it's a group that has delegates sent as representatives from all over the country and has a very restricted delegate representation, then it might be that your honorary members could attend and they could speak, but they couldn't make motions or vote. But anyway, this is where you would set that out. So, you know, for your bylaws, what you're doing in conjunction with the course, this is a very simple thing. It does not have to be complicated. But we talk about this to point out that many groups have a wide variety in what they do. They may also have patrons. The same group, Phi Beta, has sustaining patrons, faculty patrons, and artist patrons. Okay, and there's a thin line between the artist patrons and the honorary members, except the artist patrons are recognized as artists, but they have to contribute financially. If they go ahead and identify you as honorary, then, you know, you don't pay any dues. There are, oh, I know. Then sometimes the members are not individuals. For example, with the Professional Fraternity Association, the membership is held by a variety of organizations, not by individuals. With the National Panhellenic Council, made up of the social sororities, there are 26 regular members, which are kind of like the founding members, and then they have some associate members that are the sororities who are working to qualify for full status membership. Maybe they don't have, it's a fairly new group, they don't have enough national chapters. I think they have to have 10 chapters nationwide, a minimum of 3 years before they're eligible for full membership status. So they have some groups waiting in the wings, as it were, to qualify for full membership. But those people can attend convention, and I think they can speak, but certainly they can't vote because they don't have full membership. But that's a case where the organization is the member, and the organization decides who the delegate to the annual meeting will be. And if you're the meeting planner, we'll shift hats here for just a minute. You know, if you're the meeting planner, you need to understand, you really need to know the bylaws and structure of the organization so that you understand, are these delegates who are coming in, or is this like Texas speech? Every speech teacher in the state of Texas who chooses to show up could be there. You know, it makes a difference as to who you work with, what kind of authority these people have. Some of these groups, you know, you're only dealing with national presidents, and that's going to affect your mindset as you relate to the individuals that you're working with. It will also affect, in some instances, the competency level of the folks. If you've got a national president that you're working with, odds are this person has managed a number of meetings before, has skills as a presiding officer, knows some stuff about parliamentary procedure, maybe not everything, but has a much better grasp on it than if this is someone who is newly elected as an officer in a civic club or an area organization. They just have less experience. So, you know, get a group of national officers together, and you usually have a much easier time. Now, they'll conflict over issues just like anyone else, but from a meeting management standpoint, you'll have some people with skills there already. This IMSLEC group that I mentioned is an organization of organizations. You know, all the people who, they're like delegates, but they each come from different training centers. And so it's a different perspective. With National Panhellenic Council, the offices are even held by the sororities, not by the individuals. And they set up a rotation system decades ago when the organization was formed, and they go through in the chronological order that those groups came into the organization, and the chairship of the council is determined by rotation of the sorority. So if you're sorority number 14, you know, and it's your year coming, you know, you can project decades ahead what year your sorority will be treasurer. I think they start with secretary, and then treasurer, and then vice chairman, and then chairman. And you'll know when you're coming on board with that, and then the constituent group can determine who they want to hold that office. Usually it's the national president at the time, but they can elect their national president knowing that the person we elect today, 2 years from now, is going to move into the rotation to the chairship of this whole National Panhellenic Conference. And that may affect your other planning and so forth. But if that individual should resign, National Panhellenic Conference would not elect from their ranks a new person. Instead, the sorority would appoint a new person to step into that role. So you understand the difference here? And that's all set forth in the bylaws. That rotation system of the sororities is listed up there in that membership category and spelled out very specifically, very carefully, so that there's no doubt about that. And IMSLEC is the same way. They have constituent programs and delegates from those programs. Okay, some of this other we'll move through faster. Section 2, or after you've talked about who is eligible for membership and what the categories of membership are, and you may need that in 2 sections or not, but following that, then you'll talk about dues structure. And if you've gotten solicitations from something like the Museum of Fine Arts or other groups, you may, Channel 8 sends out requests for you to join and so forth and be supporters. You'll find that there are different categories. You can be a supporter, you can be a patron, you can be a sustaining patron, you can be, what are some more? A superstar. I'm drawing a blank right now on some of those labels, but or a Smithsonian institution, they've got about 5 levels there. If you give $2,500 a year, you're up in this wonderful excellence category, and here are the benefits of that membership. And that can either be spelled out under the categories or in the dues structure, just whatever makes sense. But anyway, the different levels of membership, from patron to sustaining patron to lifetime member to benefactor. And it's up to each group to figure out what they want to call those people. Okay? But if you're going to have life memberships, this is where they go. It would be a separate section, and it would specify the dues, and it would identify the privileges of that membership. Let me see if Text to Speech has. Well, I don't see what I'm looking for here. They also have, Texas Speech Association has emeritus members, and that's not an unusual category for some groups. But it says Section 3, emeritus members may be designated by the Executive Council. And usually when a faculty member retires, then if they've been an active member of the association, a publishing scholar, a dedicated service individual, if they're held in high esteem for whatever reason, then the council may vote them to emeritus membership, and then they don't have to pay dues anymore. And your convention fee is waived. There's one banquet that you get into complimentary. And this says, okay, here's an individual who's had a lifetime of distinguished service, and therefore we'll reward them in that way. Okay, how about the University of Houston? What kind of membership do we have here? I've never seen the bylaws. There's kind of bylaws in the faculty handbook. Yeah, what you thinking?
This is a state institution. How can you have a sort of membership? You come under Title 9, I believe, and 7, so you cannot discriminate or put up barriers that would otherwise inhibit anybody from being able to attend this university. I think your standards are, you have an admissions committee. I mean, if you're not totally dumb, you can get into the school.
Okay, but students are not the only members here.
And then you all have your in-house fightings, your faculty senates. I mean, that's well publicized.
Okay,
yeah.
But what are the classifications of membership?
Deans, presidents, vice presidents of administration.
Okay, you have a whole administrative hierarchy.
And none of them who teach a whole lot of students. In fact, probably
well, let's be careful what we say here.
None of them teach very many students.
Well, some do, but some don't. Okay, but within the faculty, for example, you have instructors and assistant professors and associate professors and full professors. You also have an emeritus category out there, too, that may be voted in. Okay, but anyway, dues. Then how do you get out of the group? Okay, you may find that you need a section on resignation. We know when you're no longer a member. Now, why would we want to know that? What difference? Can't you just assume if somebody stops coming, they're not a member anymore? Mike?
There are provisions for automatic resignations. I mean, if you fail to miss 3-4 meetings in a row, it's considered an automatic resignation.
By whom?
By the body. They call roll for a reason.
They who? Who are we talking about?
The organization. We're still on this, I hope, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I thought you had someone in mind because
No, if
for
you
some
haven't-
groups that doesn't matter.
Yeah, but I'm saying some people's bylaws include failure to attend 3 consecutive meetings.
Okay, you're saying that could be one
Yeah,
of the-
shall be deemed
Okay,
an automatic resignation. There's a specific reason why we have a roll call. It's not just to exercise the jaw.
Okay, but
what?
okay, good. Why do we care who the member? Why do we care whether we know who the members are? Why do we need that information?
Accountability. Everyone has to have accountability. This is an organization. It's obviously there's going to be some funding. You can't have a paupers organization. That's impossible. So there has to be some accountability. You've got expenditures, important decisions that are being made.
I'm not sure accountability is the word, or I'm not sure how you're using it.
Well, I want to know who votes for what, when, and where if they're my representative, if they belong to an organization.
Okay, that's going to show up where? In the minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, but if I'm the president of the Civic Club, why do I need to know how many members we have? We're not talking about what happens.
How much money you're going to be bringing in to set up your budget?
Okay, one reason is budgeting. How much anticipated income do we have this year? And if I know who signed up and paid dues last year, I can project for the coming year. Okay, that's a good reason. There's one other good reason. There may be more, but
Voting reasons like for quorums and
Yeah.
debates and things like that.
a quorum is what? Unless it's specified otherwise.
Needed to legally be able to conduct your business.
Okay, and what is that number if you haven't specified it? What does Robert say it is? It's a majority of your membership, okay? But you'll specify, you know, a quorum is 10% of the dues paid members. A quorum will consist of at least 15 people in attendance at a meeting. You know, you can spell that out however you want to. Some of these groups say a quorum is simply whoever shows up at the annual meeting. Texas speech is like that. We know every year when that convention will be held. We know that it's the second weekend of October, unless we're rotating to Dallas, and then we dance around the Texas OU football game, and it's either the weekend before or after. So you know when that meeting is, and you need to plan accordingly. Okay? And if you don't show up, you don't get to vote, and it's your problem. But they don't want the business of the organization impeded because folks aren't there. There are some boards that say whoever shows up at a duly called meeting constitutes a quorum. But if it's not phrased that way, if it says a quorum is a majority of the members, and that's what, if you're under Robert's rules will say it's a majority unless you've defined it as something else in your bylaws, then you have to know how many members you have. As of this meeting, how many people have paid their dues? And if 100 paid, we'll make the math easy. You know, if 100 paid their dues, then we've got to have 51 bodies in the room in order to transact business legally. And we've talked about quorums before in here. But that's why you have to know who your members are. So usually it's who has paid dues within a given year. But if you don't pay dues, like with Student Association at U of H, you know, those are elected representatives, then you need some other provision that makes it clear when you are no longer a member of that organization. You missed 2 meetings, you missed 3 meetings without excuse, whatever that rule is going to be. How delinquent will you let someone be in paying their dues? You know, if the dues aren't paid, if your fiscal year runs April 1st to March 31st, if those dues aren't paid by April 1st, are you not a member? Or is there a 30-day grace period or a 60-day grace period? Will you, particularly if you're a national group, will you send a notice to the people? You know, and I think it's Texas state parliamentarians that have a rule about that they will send you 2 notices, and if the dues are payable in January, and if they're not paid by March 1st, then you're off the roll. But whatever it's going to be, you know, can you resign as a member? In some groups you can quit, and some you can't. Things like sororities and fraternities, normally, as far as I know, most of them consider their members for life. But they have active and inactive members, and the active ones are the ones who have paid the dues, and the inactive ones are delinquent in their dues. They don't have the right to vote because they're inactive, but they're still members of the fraternity. Meaning, and most groups will not initiate someone of another organization. You know, there's probably a rare exception here and there, but the professional groups as well as the social groups will not cross-initiate. So, you know, you have to choose wisely, hopefully, and once initiated, you're a member for life. And you can't resign. You can refuse to participate and be inactive. Okay, so how, you know, can you get out of this organization, and if so, how do you do that? Okay, let's move to the next visual. Where did I put it? It's over here. Okay, generally Article 4 is going to deal with the officers of the organization. Who are they going to be, and what are you going to call them? Okay, often it's president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, but what are some more things that officers are called? You belong to any groups out there? What do they call their people? Michael?
President, vice president, secretary, treasurer. There could be a lot of terms, but normally they're called presidents.
Okay, but can you think of any in addition to that? Just anything that you've heard? You may have a president-elect, and that second slot position is an important one in the bylaws to clarify. You know, if you have a vice president, that's different from a president-elect. A president-elect will automatically move into the presidency. A vice president may or may not. They may be elected to the presidency almost automatically, but when you're conducting the election, you could elect someone else as president. Sometimes you have first, second, and third vice presidents. I think it's American Institute of Parliamentarians that has several layers, and each of those vice presidents has a variety of responsibilities. Yeah, there shall be the following officers: president, first vice president, second vice president, third vice president, secretary, treasurer, and accrediting director. The person who is in charge of getting parliamentarians certified, they view that person as having so much responsibility and significance that that person is considered an officer of the organization. Okay, can you think of any other kinds of officers? And often, you've got several things here. Who are the officers? How are they elected? What is their term of office? Are there any limits on their offices and terms? Usually it will say something like no person may hold 2 offices at the same time, and may not serve more than 2 terms in any one office. Or it may be specified within the particular office. Texas Speech Association has, I know you can't see this, but let's kind of put it up this way. You can see there they have them broken out by paragraphs. The president's duties are right there by the name of the officer. They have a vice president-elect, and so forth. And the job description is tacked in there as well. But sometimes it will just say the officers are, and they shall do their duties shall be those as usually befall officers in large organizations. Are their duties, are the typical duties of that office as set forth in the parliamentary authority? Because Roberts has a little blurb on the traditional offices as well. Now, excuse me, Texas speech has a president, a vice president, and a vice president-elect. Okay, and so when you're elected vice president-elect, that officer presides over the organization in the absence of the president, and other meetings as may be designated. They have some specific responsibilities, and then they move on up to the vice presidency. At the level of vice president, this is, in this organization, that's the person responsible for the annual convention program. And the convention program is a big one. You've got 400 people usually in attendance. They use as many as 10 breakout rooms at a time. They have simultaneous educational programs and workshops going on. So planning the convention is a really big deal. And therefore, they give the vice president-elect the responsibility of presiding if something happens to the president. You know, if they need to step in and chair a meeting, because that vice president is going to be so busy running the convention that if the president became ill for a day, pulling the vice president off of the meeting management into chairing the executive council and doing the other things that have to be done, you know, would probably give the person a nervous breakdown. And in some instances, it would just simply be a physical impossibility to be all the places you needed to be at the same time. Okay, but you haven't heard any really creative names. Let me give you some here, and then maybe you'll think of some others. Several years ago, I worked with a group called Chi Eta Phi Sorority, which is a nursing association, and I found one of their workbooks. And they called their annual meeting their boule. See the word up there, B-O-U-L-E? The president called me, you know, and said, we need a parliamentarian. We're holding our annual boule in Houston. Your annual what? You know, have you ever heard that word before? Okay. I hadn't either, and so I had to do some informal checking. I can't remember now. I want to say that the word has a Cajun derivative to it. Stephanie's shaking her head, yes. But a boule is a big happening, kind of like Mardi Gras or something, Mardi Gras with business. But anyway, they call, you know, they don't refer to their annual meeting, they refer to their boule. Okay, their officers have some of the most unusual names that I've ever heard, and I didn't get to the root meaning of some of these or why they chose them, but their national president is called the Supreme Basilius. The Supreme Basilius. Okay, the vice president, and they have a first vice president and a second vice president, but that's not what they're called. One is called, the first VP is called the First Supreme Anti-Basilius. And then there is a second Supreme Anti-Basilius. There's an executive secretary, but the treasurer, I think this is the treasurer, I've forgotten now, is the Tamias, T-A-M-I-A-S. And so, you know, I'm listening to these officers and someone says, is the Tamias here yet? The what? You know, and where is your treasurer? You know, so if you were working with, and even if you're the meeting planner, and the Supreme Basilius tells you the Tamias will write you a check, oh yeah? You know, and where will I find this person? Now they have an editor-in-chief, a historian, regional directors, a national organizer, which I think was their convention planner. Okay, now hearing those names, do you think of other groups? You know, I think the law fraternity called their national president the Grand Counselor. Okay, have you ever done anything like Mason, or have relatives in Masons or Eastern Star or Rainbow Girls or any of those things? They have worthy advisors and associate worthy advisors and different names for the officers like Faith, Hope, and Charity. And those are the names of stations out there. Okay, but it makes sense within that organization. You know, but whether they're called grand counselors or the supreme president or the grand hooba-dooba, you know, your bylaws are going to tell you who these officers are and what their responsibilities are, how you're going to elect them. You know, will they be elected at large at the annual meeting? And this ties into, may tie into the nominating committee as well. How do you get people nominated? Do you only have one person nominated for each office? Are they elected by the total membership? Are they elected by the board of directors? Usually not. Are they elected? Texas Speech calls their board of directors the executive council. Are they elected by the total membership? Are they elected by mail vote? You know, we get real skewed elections in Texas Speech because the officers are elected at the last business session of the convention. The convention almost always starts with committee meetings on Thursday morning, programs on Thursday afternoon. Usually there's a big general session on Friday morning and a second general session on Saturday morning, and everything is over with by 1 o'clock on Saturday, except a few committee meetings. Well, a lot of people leave on Friday evening to drive home, or they get up Saturday morning and drive home. They don't stay for that second business meeting. The fact that people leave early, some leave early, and there's a geographical skew because under conventions it says there's a 5-area geographical plan for rotating the convention around the state. If it's in Dallas, you know, you're going to pull in lots of local people from there. If it's in Houston, which is a different region, Corpus Christi, usually either Austin or San Antonio, it'll go west, usually to El Paso, sometimes somewhere else. You pull the local constituency, and so it skews the election in favor of that geographical area each year. As long as you understand that's what's happening, that's okay. I mean, we made the determination that that's all right. It affects when you run for office. If you're running for vice president-elect and you really want to be elected, if you're from Corpus, you should not run in a year that the convention's being held in Dallas, and vice versa. Okay, unless you're so awesome and wonderful that everybody everywhere will vote for you. You know. But how will the people be elected? National organizations like National Speech Communication Association sends out a ballot because there's such a massive geographical skew. They'll have 2,500, maybe 3,000 people at a convention, but there are probably 6,000 or 7,000 members nationwide, some of whom never go to convention, but they don't want to disenfranchise those people. So in that case, they'll conduct a mail vote in order to equalize and make more fair, you know, the election and not disenfranchise anyone. But how do you get that slate of officers? You know, do you have a nominating committee? Is it appointed? Is it elected? Do they present only one person for each office, or do they present 2 or 3? Usually it's a slate of 2. But in some groups they go with 3, so they have 2 losers each time. You know, misery loves company. And certainly if you're a national group, that may be appropriate. Texas Speech Association has the most elaborate nominating process that I'm aware of. I don't know if I can put my hands on it right now, but they have a committee to nominate the nominating committee. And so they submit names of people and they elect a committee that then in turn in the calendar year identify people who are eligible to serve on the nominating committee. Once you've been on the nominating committee, you can't be on it again for 5 years. But if you're on the nominating committee, you know, you shouldn't be nominating yourself for office. So occasionally you have groups that do, but it's kind of in poor taste usually. Depends. If it's a little group, you know, that things happen with little groups that shouldn't occur with national groups. But the committee to nominate the nominating committee then generates this list of people who are eligible to serve on the nominating committee and presents that ballot to the convention, and then they elect based on geographical distribution and taking out all the people who for the past 5 years have served and are ineligible. You know, but it's a very complicated process because they're trying to ensure this sense of balance and fair play. But then the nominating committee is charged with presenting the slate of officers. So Article 4 is going to tell you who the officers are, how they get elected, their term of office. Will they serve 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? Can they be reelected? How many times can they be reelected? Some groups say no more than 3 consecutive terms of 2 years each. Some will say 2 terms of 3 years each. For some, it's 1 year and that's it, folks. You know, because you may have a group where you have a lot of people eager to serve and folks are waiting in the wings for their turn to be national president or whatever. And it's up to the group. And you know, you may amend the bylaws from one convention to another, usually not every year, but you know, 8, 10 years down the line you may discover, well, we have people less eager to serve right now for whatever reason. Maybe we want to go, or we're in financial straits, we want to go to biannual meetings instead of annual meetings. But that would be specified, that part would be specified under meetings, but the term of office would be specified here. Okay, let's go ahead and look at meetings. Article 5 is normally where you address meetings. Okay, when Section 1 usually deals with regular meetings. If you need to designate an annual meeting, which is almost always appropriate, Section 2 is a good place to do that. Section 1 may be very simple. This board or group will meet on the 3rd Monday night of each month, unless by 2/3 vote of the board they change it for unusual circumstances. You might want a qualifier. Okay, but then normally in Section 2 you would find a spot to indicate, not find a spot, Section 2 would be the spot, where you would indicate which of these meetings is the annual meeting. And the annual meeting is where you may have some additional reports. There may be some committees that only report at the annual meeting. The annual meeting is normally where you would elect officers. And you need to know at which meeting of the year will you elect officers. Now, if it's the state convention and you only have one convention, that may be kind of obvious in there that the annual meeting is the state or national convention. And then you'll probably have under Board of Directors an indication that the board will meet at least one other time during the year with an interim meeting. We're coming to that down here. But anyway, with your whole organization, and what you may just call that Texas Speech Communication Association, MSLEC refers to the big parent, the biggest group, as the council, the MSLEC council, and so forth. But what is their regular meeting, which is their annual meeting, and how can a special meeting be called? Can a special meeting be called at the discretion of the president, by a majority of the executive committee? Sometimes you need an emergency meeting. If the organization is in financial difficulty, if there's just been some big something that came along that you have to address. Usually special meetings are more likely to be called for the executive committee or the board of directors, but Anyway, however, you're going to get a special meeting. Can it be called by the members? You know, if a civic club has really crummy officers, can 20 members of the civic club sign a petition and call a special meeting? And some groups have those provisions. So how will you get a special meeting? Clarify the quorum. It will be, under Robert, a majority, and under Sturgis too, a majority of the members unless you say otherwise. Now, as long as you have no problem getting a majority of the people there, then you're okay. But if you ever start having borderline attendance at a meeting and it looks like, for whatever reason, you know, something neat started happening on the same night that your group meets, then you either need to change your meeting time or change your quorum or something. You don't want to get in a situation where you can't get a quorum to transact business, because you're in serious trouble then. And one group called me years ago that could not even get a quorum to amend their bylaws, to change their rules, and I didn't know what to tell them. I said, you can act out of order, you can dissolve the organization and form a new one, but I said, you probably need to call a lawyer, you know, because you're an incorporated group, and I'm not quite sure what's going to happen to you at this point. We're on real tenuous technical ground here. Okay, Article 6 is your board of directors. It's sometimes called it may be the Legislative Council. Texas Speech calls it the Executive Council. MSLAC calls it the Board of Directors. You know, it will have different names. Within the Church of Christ, the Board of Directors is the elders, and they have all the power. They have all the power except what they call them the Board of Trustees. But it says the trustees shall be all the elders of the church. So those two are interchangeable. And there's a high power concentration in that board. But then they may turn around and authorize other teams or boards. They spawned, and with that particular organization, another board that oversees a program at the Texas Medical Center, a chaplaincy program over there. Okay, and that board acts with full authority and power at the pleasure of this other board. And as long as the second board is keeping the first board happy, they're completely left alone. They just send minutes over, you know, for informational purposes. But if the second board, which is really like a subcommittee of this other group, or a standing committee of the other group is probably more appropriate, if they were to ever get out of line, you know, start throwing booze parties at the hospital, or, you know, doing something that's really out of line with the purposes of the parent group, they could dissolve that board in a heartbeat. One motion would just wipe it off the face of existence. Okay, but anyway, who is, in your parent organization, who is the board of directors? Normally, the officers are all on it, but then you may have regional representation. The composition of a board of directors gets very complicated, Normally, the executive committee, and that's under standing committees, will be just the officers. But the board may have the officers plus regional representatives, all the interest groups in Texas speech like oral interpretation, public address, debate, it's called forensics in here, interpersonal communication, mass media. I may not have all the titles exactly right. Instructional development, K through 12, mass communication, theater, interpretation, interpersonal and small group, rhetoric and comm theory, Texas junior colleges, 3, 6, 9. There are about a dozen different interest groups, and they all send representatives to the executive council, which is like the board of directors. MSLAC has a very complicated board of directors. Because they are interested in public funding, they have to have public members that are not members of any of the parent organizations. So they have 10 founding groups, all of whom have directors. Then they have 3 at-large directors elected by the council, 2 public directors who are elected by the board but are not from any of the constituent members. And then there are 3 other representatives from certain designated councils, other groups that are of affiliated nature. And so they've got a really big board here that comes from several different directions. But Section 1 is where you define what that board is all about. Section 2, what are the powers of the board? And that may have a sweeping statement that says they're in charge of everything between the annual meetings, or it may spell it out in 10 or 20 different itemized statements. How do you get meetings of the board? What are, will they have one interim meeting? Can they call special meetings? What's the quorum for a board of directors meeting? Normally you're at Article 7 when you get to committees, but if you have a very complicated government structure, you may need to break that out in separate articles. So you may have more, as we'll see in a minute. Article 7 deals with all the permanent committees. These are in no particular order here. You may or may not have any or all of these, but typical standing committees are things like finance, program, auditing, accreditation, membership, scholarship, nominating. But when you get down to the bottom, there normally and appropriately is in the last section, whether it's Section 3 or Section 29, how do you get other committees? And it will say something like other committees may be designated by the Board of Directors, or other committees may be appointed by the President with the approval of the board, whatever. Usually there's a statement probably under the job description for the President, but normally the President is an ex officio member of all the committees except the nominating committee. Sometimes if you have an accrediting committee, they don't want the President on that one either. But it's up to the group. I think IMSLEC put their President on all committees except nominating, accrediting, and research. And they've got their reasons for that. But anyway, you name your committees, you list the duties of those committees. In there too, you could either have a blanket statement at the top that says all committee members serve for 2 years or until their successor is selected, or if it varies by committees. There may be some committees like accrediting where you have 7 members and they're on rotated, or you have 9 and they're on 3-year terms and a third rotate off each time. That's also true of your board of directors. You may have a number divisible by 3, 12 members on the board of directors, and they rotate off, or 9. It works real well to have 9 members all on 3-year terms and a third rotate off each time. And if you're a newly formed group, you just draw straws on that first time to find out who gets, or you go by the election. IMSLEC did that. When 3 people were elected at large, the one who got the most votes got the 3-year term, second most votes the 2-year term, least votes but being elected got the 1-year term. Okay, then the last 3 basic articles, and we've talked about those briefly before. Near the end of your bylaws, you're going to specify your parliamentary authority, going to specify how the bylaws will be amended, and next time we'll talk a little bit more about the rules for amending the bylaws. But normally you want at least previous notice and a 2/3 vote. Okay, the dissolution clause that says what's going to happen to your money if you dissolve, and it needs to go to some good purpose consistent with the purposes of the total organization. And then you may have all kinds of other articles, and we can look at those later too, such as chartering of chapters, administration, the job of the executive director, certification, publications, those kinds of things. So we'll continue with this next time and probably get back to our building blocks too.